Righty-ho, good morning ladies and gentlemen to Auckland Beekeepers Club May Club Meeting stroke webinar. It's a lovely day outside, but thanks very much indeed for joining in. We've got some good presentations for you this morning. Starting off will be Kim talking about how to plan for next year. Then we're going to have a short session on looking at networking and so forth between experienced and less experienced beekeepers. Davies will have a bit of a talk about that. We'll go through the various club hives, talking about what worked and what didn't and what was learnt from each of the different teams. And then the Q&A session will be at the end. And that'll give you plenty of time to think of some questions relating to perhaps this season or something like that. So and in that Q&A session, we're also going to have some polls pop up, which you can actually participate in, and that'll give us some talking points as well based on your responses to those polls. Righty-ho, I'll step to one side and ask Kim if she can start and talking about how to plan for next year. Thank you.
Good morning. So I'm having a few technical difficulties. I had a PowerPoint presentation to pop on the screen again, but haven't been able to load that. The good old Spark service has let me down quite severely at this time. So instead I'm going to talk about a few things. I did have some slides with things that I wanted to put across, and perhaps later we'll be able to put those through in an email for you to view. So how to plan for next year based around determining what beekeepers want from their hives. Well, let's first look at what has been happening in our beekeeping year so far. So we've had some of you start your first year beekeeping, and that's a big learning curve, and we're going to look at that in just a minute. Some of you have been beekeeping for a few seasons, and are you doing it the same old way? Do you want to change things? Did you enjoy your beekeeping season? Every season is a little bit different, so what did you learn from this one? And did some of the beekeeping things become too much for you? You know, we're all not, some of us aren't spring chickens anymore. Perhaps we have to change our style of beekeeping to still make it comfortable for us. And bees, if we look after them well, will increase. So how many hives do we actually want? So the first year, you're learning a lot about your bees. What have you remembered? What did you enjoy about it? And what would you like to change, or what can you change? Is there other options? So this presentation is going to be reviewing a lot of what you've done and putting those questions to you to yourself over the next couple of months, being winter, and how can we make those changes and research those changes. So some of those things will be obviously talking to other beekeepers. So once we get back to field days, it'll be great. You'll be able to go back in those beehives, have a look and see it maybe if you want to change your options. So just a quick think about that first year. There was bees building up in the hive in the numbers. The comb was drawn out. Varroa wasn't too much of a problem in your first year, but you know, how am I handling it now? And did I leave too much honey or not enough honey? Those are the first year things that we always ask ourselves. So watch your hive even over winter, and you'll get to know what your hive needs for the next winter. And did I look after my gear? Did I have enough gear? So all those things require us to remember them, but not always is our mind that great. So record keeping is one of the things that I always encourage. Now, I did have a couple of options in my PowerPoint slides to view the different records and styles that we could use, and perhaps, as I mentioned before, we can have that go through in some emails later on. Now, your first year, also, you've seen your hives build up from a nuke into a single box, and you might have only got to 3 or 4 boxes high. Well, if you look after all your comb, next year you'll be getting up to 5 or 6 boxes if you're lucky. So the second year, 2 years on, what do we need to start thinking about for next time? Beating the varroa problem. Are we in control of that? You know, we're going to be going through winter. There's still going to be some varroa. How are we going to handle that in spring? What kind of treatments are we going to do? Have the wasps found you? You know, they usually try and live within about 500 metres of an apiary or a hive, so they'll be moving in. So a second year on, we're going to have to start thinking about that. Not so much in spring and summer, but are we addressing that problem now? Was the last year different to the year before if you've been beekeeping for a few years? I noticed it hugely different for me. The honey, wow, it was so much tackier. And our seasons dried up, our summer dried up. Have I addressed that regards planting or water sources or even extracting, what time of year I extract my honey? And how is my hiveware holding up? So my frames have been going for a few years. I have to start thinking about rotating some of that old comb out of my brood area. I don't want my bees to be, or my queen to be laying in a brood area that might have viruses. So percentages may be moving and replacing some next spring and summer. So there's always an ongoing cost. It's a hobby, so we do need to allow a little bit of money set aside to look after our bees. Varroa treatments. Are we changing our varroa treatment? How much is that going to cost? So start budgeting as well for what styles. And of course, second season, we've got to start thinking about our queens, the age of our queens. What kind of queen do I want? Do I want to keep with Italians, or maybe I want to try Carniolans? And of course, second season queens are going to swarm or think of swarms. So what kind of management are we going to start putting in there? Oh, this is planning, isn't it? So a lot of questions need to be asked now of ourselves over the next couple of months. Now just bear with me because I'm going through my PowerPoint presentation that I had for you guys, and I'm moving to a couple of slides. So I actually put a photo up on, I went and looked at my beehives yesterday, and I looked at my stack of hiveware. Now I'm starting to think that some of my hiveware needs replacing. So winter's a really good time to review that. You know, is there holes in some of those boxes? Is there dry rot in my boxes? How many boxes might I need to replace? And maybe I want to change from the size of the boxes, from full depth down to 3/4. How am I going to do that? So it's a really, over this time, is a really good time to review what I've had in the last 12 months, or what I've had over in the season, and what I want to change to suit me. Because we can read all the books and we can look at all the library books and the videos and everything, but that style might not suit us. So again, field days are really good. Instead of just working on one beehive or going into one beehive, have a look at the other 6 styles that are going on and seeing what's happening in those different types of beehives. So my concentration at the moment, I went and looked at my hives and I looked at all the entrances. So this is a bit of a review for me. Some of the entrances were busy at 5 o'clock yesterday, and one was particularly quiet. So I needed to go into that hive and see, you know, how my stores were, what the brood pattern was starting to look like, and go back to my records and start reviewing how old my queen is. So now I can start thinking I might need to replace her. So now is the time where I can start looking for new queens. Either I produce them myself, or I might go to a queen breeder. So look around. This is what we can do over winter. Do I want something different from my bees? Maybe I want to start collecting propolis or pollen. This is the time I could read books and look at different ideas that way. and my varroa control. Definitely changing varroa control is a key to it. So what have I done in autumn? What am I going to do in spring and summer? I found a bit of moisture in some of my lids yesterday, so perhaps I need to review what I'm going to have between my inner lid and outer lid, getting a bit of equipment together for that. And I found my honey very different in different areas, weather patterns again, but I'm definitely going to be reviewing how I extract my honey. So perhaps that's the same for you. I literally had some so thick that I had to rush out and get some muslin and honey press it through. So that's a review for me. So what are the reviews going to be for you? I discovered that rurally I need to feed my cappings back on a wet day because I've got so many beehives around me that I don't want to encourage robbing. And what was robbing like for you? So just little changes can be thought of over the next couple of months. And that's what it's really about. You can come up with reviewing now to deciding what you want for the future. And that's about it from me, because technology isn't that great, and some of the slides I have aren't going to be showing. So short and sweet, and let's see what those questions are. Thank you. That's it from me.
Thanks, Kim. David, can we dive in?
Yeah, hi everybody. Talking a little bit about networking in your community. Our committee is very aware that one of the main objects of the club is looking after each other. We operate the demonstration apiary and we hold field days to give hands-on experience and talks, and we have the beekeeping supplies going through the shop for you, certain amount of socializing, and collectively our members, they're right through the community looking after swarms, providing a wide source of knowledge to the public and in schools and so on. And I think the industry's done a really good job over recent years of promoting the place of bees in the community and the context of environmental awareness. And I found that really helpful in terms of acceptance in the community, because at one time the neighbours would be phoning up and saying the guy next door's got bees and we've got a problem. Now they phone up and say the guy next door's got bees and that's great. So they're very, it's quite a different environment now. But for ourselves, one of our objects is to be a managed channel for the delivery and exchange of information for our members as well as the public. We've got a lot of information going out at our field days and through our journals and emails, but we've got 600 members in the club throughout Auckland, 600. So networking's not as easy as it was decades ago when we only had a very small number at field days and so on. So for every member that comes to the field days now, there's about 4 or 5 that don't make it into the field days. I'm sure they get a lot of benefit out of the club membership in other ways, and the journal in particular. Carol does a great job there. So the committee's been discussing the practicality of networking for a club which is spread over such a huge area geographically, and the obvious conclusion is that our networking and mentoring outside field days is probably pretty much a local community matter. Works well on the field days, but as I say, there's not a great number. There's a lot of people that are not there. Some of our areas in Auckland have already got a local group of beekeepers networking online, just knowing each other. And we certainly encourage you to touch base with the beekeepers in your area. The club's database may be useful if individual members choose to be part of that sharing of personal information. We've got to be aware of the privacy thing and that sort of thing, but we're looking at one option that we've got the Google Maps system that we put in place last year with Dave Hendricks did a great job putting the swarm contacts into a Google map. And so people could look up beekeepers in their area who were wanting to collect swarms and so on. And it is possible that we could provide another layer of information enabling members to see other beekeepers in their area. And that would be, if they agreed, of course, that information would be available to the general public though. We have to be aware of that, Google being a public platform, but that may not be a bad thing, because sometimes the public are wanting to touch base with a beekeeper in order to talk bees and get into schools and help out in that way. We could be working on these ideas, but we have to keep in mind we're a voluntary organisation, so our committee members are already pretty busy. But if we can get a fairly automated networking system taking privacy considerations into account, we will see what we can do. But let us know what you think. We've got the ability to contact us back through the club's email address, get your feedback. Just a reminder that we operate a website for members. If you search on Google for the Auckland Beekeepers Club, it'll come up. Your login will be the first 3 letters of your first name, followed by the first 3 letters of your last name. So that's a standard login that we use for all members, and then the password is one that you select. So when you go on that website, just have a look at the info tab about the middle of the top of the website. When you go in, click on that, because it's got some useful information how to use the website as a link. Tells you how to log in, how to register for a course, and registering for swarms and so on. So if you've got ideas to contribute, please send them to the email address. It's in the latest journal, and that's going in the mail next week. And we're really just encouraging you to touch base with beekeepers in your area and share current information about your beekeeping environment. So watch this space. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dave. That was good, and strongly encourage you, if you can, build networks up with other people in your local area and things like that. I've found it's been incredibly helpful to me over the past years, and we actually get together in groups and make things as well, like solar wax melters and stuff like that, so we can share resources and buildings. So networking is a good way to contribute and add depth into your own beekeeping. Moving on to hive reports. And I think we were going to start first with Carol, weren't we, talking about Hive Zero?
Yes, we are. Thanks, Steve. First of all, Hive Zero, I'm really still very happy with our setup, which is a pollen trap with a mesh bottom board that's working really well. And part of what the pollen trap has is an entry that goes via 4 small other entry points. So it's actually got, there's a 7 centimetre little walk the bees have to do to get into the actual hive body itself. and this is also very good for deterring wasps, so that's actually working. The other thing about having that mesh bottom pollen trap is it works really well for vaporizing. So I'll talk about a few things that worked and a couple of things that didn't work that well and where we want to go next year. So a little long about what Kim was talking about. So basically I'm happy with the setup. I really do like the half depth boxes because they, especially at vulnerable times around about November when the weather can be very variable and sometimes gets really cold, the half depth boxes aren't quite as hard for bees to warm up if they've gone on a bit early. The first thing was that we replaced our queen last season with a cell, and it built up, it went through winter and built up from a very, very small brood area. We nursed it through. So it built up really, really well. We also did a bit of frame recycling. So we've got a few new frames in there, and we'll be doing a wee bit more of that this year by taking the old frames from the side or moving the really old frames to nearer the side of the hive and taking those out when the bees start to build up solidly. So what we haven't done this year is replace the queen, which I'm really a bit unhappy about because I would rather have an autumn queen in there now, which means that they set up really, really well through the winter. So that's one thing I don't think is possibly going to work, but we'll get feedback from that. I've been using, and I'm going to call them the oxalic glycerin staples because that's the common way that your beekeepers can get them. I've been using those in the hive for treatment, and I did make a note in January to replace some, and they weren't replaced. So that was one thing that didn't work due to not checking notes. So if you're going to be using something that relies on consistent use, then make sure that you can actually keep up with it, or I could have probably got team members to help with that, but didn't. So therefore we've had a build-up of mites. The other thing that I think really worked for our hive last year was we did 3 extractions. One of the problems with this is that it doesn't give the club as much honey to extract on the days that we're doing extraction and running teaching. However, it did seem to work really well with our hives. We also got 3 quite different looking lots of honey, and because it wasn't labelled at the time, I've also got honey to feed back to the bees, so that worked really well. So I really do think that if you really want to get interesting honey that's varied, then doing extractions as you go is quite a good idea. It also stimulates the bees. The one other thing that I think didn't work was I did not get boxes onto the hive quick enough for the bees to draw, which meant that the other advantage of a pollen trap is that when if the population gets too high and the bees have got nowhere to build up above them, they'll build below, and there's also about maybe a 15 centimetre gap underneath the hive. So the bees actually did build a lot of drone comb onto there, which was great. I mean, that was drone comb removal, so I had to take a fair bit of that off, but that could have gone into the honey boxes. So really that was a fault on me not getting those boxes on quickly enough. The other thing was that I did feed the wets back on the last extraction, which I think it's actually great to have wets back on the box because the bees actually clean that up, and that'll also be somewhere that if we've got honey in the shop that we obviously won't be selling at the Easter show, that can actually be put into the wax, and it makes it a lot easier for the bees to take it up. So a lot of stuff worked. I'd like to get a nice new queen in there as soon as possible, and the bees did really well. In fact, the bees did awesomely well considering the hard trot they had to get through winter. We have been doing tests the didn't treat in January, didn't put the staples in January. The mite count was high. We've now got that down by using 2 treatments a week. We've been doing that. So it's just about now going into a weekly regime, or I may even look at putting another treatment on, but I'll have a chat with a few people about that. So that's all from me. So that was Hive 0 or Hive O. Thank you. Hive 2.
Hello everyone, I'm going to introduce Hive 2, and I'm also going to talk about the flow hive. I'm not sure which screen I've got sharing now. Yes, that one, good. So last year Hive 2 moved to a new position in the apiary, and we moved it 1 metre at a time over varying intervals of between 1 and 4 days. And it was in place ready for the 2019-20 season. And the hive started as a really small nucleus colony of less than 5 frames in a full depth box. And it really surprised me how quickly the bee numbers increased and the amount of nectar they were bringing in. So I brought in a second brood box and culled out some swarm cells, and by the end, and then we added another box, and then by the end of December, the hive had 3 honey supers. Each time a box was added to the hive, the frames inside the box were foundation only, and they were checkerboarded with existing drawn frames to encourage the bees to draw them out. And by the end of summer, the girls had drawn out 36 of the 38 foundation only frames that had been given to them. And they'd also found time to make a huge amount of buzz comb between the queen excluder and the brood box under it, and the queen excluder and the honey super on top of it. And they'd filled it, all the buzz comb, with nectar, which made for somewhat messy hive checks, and also was really quite anxiety provoking for me because of the worry about robbing as the comb broke and nectar was exposed. One of the honey supers on the hive was only going to ever be for bee food, because the girls had started filling the frames before the synthetic mite treatments came out, and during the 2-week stand down period between the strips coming out and being able to use the honey for human use. And the other 2 honey supers had 9 frames in them to encourage the bees to draw the frames out, draw the comb out deeply. And the hive were able to send 18 frames of capped honey for extraction. Then we had, the hive has had regular oxalic acid treatment since July last year, and the frequency of the treatment's been determined by the average daily mite drop. We use synthetic, supplementary synthetic mite treatments, and that was just to be sure that the varroa mite was going to have a minimal impact on the hive. And it does appear that that's what happened, because the highest average daily mite drop since August last year has been 5 mites a day, and that was at the end of April, about 2 weeks ago. So we had Baverol strips in for our autumn synthetic treatment, and they came out at the end of April, and we're continuing the oxalic acid mite treatments weekly at the moment, because I personally have a really low tolerance for mites, and the average daily drop is 1 to 2 a day. When I wintered down the hive at the end of April, we had 4 frames of brood, and the queen had a good laying pattern. There was plenty of capped honey and pollen, and the girls had filled another full frame of nectar, plus lots of other bits of nectar all over the place. And the foraging bees will still be bringing in lots of pollen. So So this has been my first year as a Hive team leader, and I'd really like to thank Paul Walsh and Carol Downer for being so willing to share their knowledge and experience with me and answer my questions that sometimes turned out to be really silly questions, and also thank them for looking over my shoulder when my confidence deserted me. And I'd also like to thank Des and Pat, Maggie and Paul, who came in most of the field days and helped me check the hives. So I'm now going to change hats, and I'm actually this time presenting for the Flow Hive team. So the Flow Hive came into spring as a strong, healthy hive, and the population increased really significantly over over spring. The team culled several swarm cells in November and began discussing the logistics of doing a split. And a couple of weeks later realised that they must have missed a swarm cell because they arrived all ready to do a split and the hive had swarmed and there was a new queen. Fortunately, she had a good laying pattern and the bees were calm under her watch, or they still are calm. And the bees over spring and summer filled around 4 of the flow frames with capped honey. Although this was almost double the year before, the bees seem to still prefer putting nectar into the standard wax comb, and the hive is going into winter with plenty of honey stores. When the hive was wintered down at the end of April, there were 3 frames of brood and good pollen stores. The team primarily used synthetic mite treatments, and this year the mid-synthetic treatment mite drop assessment in early April showed there was still about 10 mites dropping a day. So some supplementary oxalic acid vaporization were treatments were introduced to ensure that mite numbers were really low going into winter. And so the apparent lack of synthetic treatment efficacy, probably due to a number of factors, such as the hive still having 3 frames of brood, still ongoing foraging, and generally mild autumn weather, and probably a component of some Baverol resistant mites. The Baverol strips came out at the end of April and the oxalic acid treatments have continued weekly. The average daily mite drop is down to 1 to 2 a day. And thanks to John, Carl and Craig for helping manage the hive this season. We had a good one. Thank you. We're ready for Hive 3, Lisa.
Hi everybody, we're just waiting for my slideshow to come up. Thanks Dave. Okay, Hive 3. We have had a really good season in terms of bees. As you can see from this photo, we have bees everywhere. This photo was taken after we had done a split. Has done a split and the following day this is what the hive looked like. So I think we upset our girls. Moving on. Okay. So we had lots of bees, so we thought if we don't do something about it, we're going to have a swarm. So the bench hive was in need of a queen, so we did a split and we shared our queen with, stop talking to me Dave, we shared our queen with the bench hive, and we were rewarded with a new queen. And what we have here is the cell, which is a swarm cell, I must admit, but we're pretty sure that's where our new queen came from. trying to move on here. Okay. So in terms of honey, because we did have a new queen, we did a split, we did have a new queen, she needed time to build up. So our honey harvest was not what it could have been within a second year queen. So we ended up getting 6.55 kgs of honey off the hive, which we were going to pot and sell at the Easter show, but with everything that's gone on, that didn't happen. So we're keeping that for the girls. We also left enough honey on the hive for the girls to winter down on. So this is this honey that we've got here will be only used if necessary, but at the moment that probably won't happen. But in saying that, we did do a BT last month, that's the feeder there. So we put the BT on last month, which they sucked up really well. So they've got all those goodies in their little bellies or have saved the tea for over winter, which will set them up ready for spring. So the other thing that we wanted to achieve for the season and have never been able to do before, because we had a stubborn queen or queens successively, was get our queen into a 3/4 box. So we now have our brood colony in 3/4 boxes. We also had to change our robbing screen. As you can see here, it had got dry rot, and the girls thought that was another entrance, as they do. So we made one at home out of macrocarpa, and I scorched it and dipped it in wax. As you can see, there's wax dripped all over the screen, so hopefully they'll clean that up at some stage. But that's their wax. The macrocarpa should last far longer than the pine, painted pine, and be far better for our girls. Our chosen form of treatment is oxalic acid vaporization, and we have used nothing else over the season. This is the girls on the 13th of April, which was the inspection I did on the 13th of April. We had about 6 frames of brood in 3/4 frames, and I moved them all down to the bottom box and put honey on top. So what you have here is yesterday, and there is our beautiful girl. That's our queen, and she is still laying. You can actually see eggs in these cells here when you look at this picture up close. So yesterday, Bernie and Miffy out of our team went in and did an inspection. Over the period that we've been on this COVID-19 journey, I've been doing all of the oxalic acid treatments because I didn't want the team to be put at risk. Yesterday or this week, we decided that at level 3 that the risk is much reduced, and Bernie and Miffy offered to come in and do the inspection while I did this presentation today. So as you can see, we have lots of bees. We have a beautiful queen, and we should be all right for coming into the next season. So these photos here are from when I did my inspection on the 13th of April. So nice laying pattern on all of the frames, and once again lots of bees. Now Varroa, our nemesis for all of us. Oh, I hate these things. I join you on that one, Karin. They continue to be a challenge. We continue to be stubborn about our treatments that we're using. They continue to drop on our boards and show us that they're still around. What we did find over the season, as you can see from this graph that Karin very kindly has put together after I let her know every time I look at a sticky board what the mite drop is. As you can see, there's been a couple of instances, or 3 there, where we missed doing the treatments as regularly as what were doing. So we try to keep it to, we'd like to keep it to once a fortnight, but it would seem that once a week is what they need in order to keep them down. And if we don't do that, we have a gap like here and here and here, it might start going up. So at the moment, this one here has caused the mites to go back up to, over a 7-day period, there was 135 mites or something like that. But they will come back down again. I have no doubt at that. We just increase the days that we, or lessen the days that in between treatments. So we're now doing 3 or 4 daily treatment, every 4th day treatment. And they're with us, so we just have to deal with them. With using the sticky boards, we have the luxury of having the sticky boards at the club because we have them. There's lots of other things that you can see from the sticky boards, not only the fact that you've got varroa mites dropping on them. You can actually see the activity of what your bees are doing within your hive. So you can see this, there's a major cleaning going up here, and they've taken some, obviously been cleaning up or eating the honey or stores from this side. And they tend to be keeping to this side of the box, which is at the apiary, it's the east side of the box. And this is the same. But that's between, that's in March, and this one was in April. So they look completely different across the 2 months, depending on what's happening out there as well. And you can see pollen on here, you can see bee bits, you can see ants, and lots of other things that are on. That's wax moth poop, because that's with us as well. Oh, sorry, I just flicked my, I should stop playing with the mouse. Yes, so that's monitoring and oxalate vaporization. So for the season, we're happy with where we're at. We didn't probably get as much honey as we would have liked to for the club, but the girls come first. So thank you very much.
It's great. Thanks, Lisa. And then on to the bench hive as the next one. And who was going to present on the bench?
I'm back again. I'm back again to present on behalf of the bench hive. And with the hive being robbed out in May of 2019, our season didn't start until September. Although we had a robbing screen on a strong hive, it still sadly succumbed. Maybe it wasn't a strong hive, although it had been treated with apuvar. Were the mite numbers still too high when we removed the strips? Could the smell of some of the frames that we scraped honey off to feed back to the bees have been just too much for the other hives to resist? More questions that we don't know the answer to. To get the hive up and running again, Hive 3 gave us their queen along with 3 frames of bees and brood in September. We kept these bees confined to a 5-frame space to let them build up. And they really had a great brood build up, so we're able to extend the frames to use the whole hive space. Going into the honey season, we decided to use oxalic acid over summer. Our mite numbers were average at this stage, but with regular oxalic acid treatments that had originally been at fortnightly intervals, our mite count was building up. We assumed this was summer timing along with the many high drone numbers hatching. Having since learned that the oxalic acid quickly disperses in the hive after treatment, we were probably missing a lot of the mites, but it seemed the more we treated, the higher our mite count rose. We started treating weekly and then down to every 3 days. The commitment needed for regular oxalic acid treatment is huge. And at the time, we only had 1 team member living close, and it was a huge ask to treat regularly. As oxalic acid was a new treatment to most of the hive team in Hive 5, although a couple regularly use it, I had mixed emotions as to why we were still seeing high mite numbers in the hive. I researched oxalic acid and found so many different opinions that I was even more confused. There were so many varying answers by people who were well researched. So what options did we have? We needed to do something and decided to continue with the oxalic acid. I was buoyed along by other hives at our apiary who were also using oxalic acid and the assistance in the advice they offered. Around Christmas, our mite count was doubling, so we decided to start double dosing with oxalic acid. Although we were doing really intense treatments, we were still seeing bees with deformed wings. The bee numbers stayed high though, and nectar was still rolling in and they were filling frame after frame. As it approached spring, we decided to treat with Baverol. I realised this had mixed reactions and emotions for the team, and particularly those who would have liked to continue just using oxalic acid, but we couldn't afford to lose the hive again. So we took advice from more experienced beekeepers on the committee who also thought that using the Baverol was the best option for our hive. By this time, our count was more than 235 mites over 4 days, and it was still increasing. We decided to leave all the honey frames in the hive for the bees rather than send any to extraction. We had bees covering most of the frames, and by this stage they were actually starting to look healthy. The Baverol strips went in at the end of February, and then the hive was hit by wasps. They would start diving into the hive as soon as we opened up, so we kept inspections to an absolute minimum. We turned the robbing screen round so that only a small number of bees, so the bees only had a small entrance, but the wasps still were attacking. In March, we saw a huge drop in bee numbers with dead bees covering the base of the hive. The girls seemed a lot more agitated than normal. We continued the oxalic acid treatment while the Baverol strips were in place, and in April we finally started to see mite numbers drop. I don't know why, and I've found the answers very varied as to why. With the lockdown, we were lucky that Steve and Karin stood in to look after the hive over this period. The Baverol was removed at the end of April, and the oxalic acid treatments are still happening once a week, and we're now down to an average of 1 mite a day. Steve's going to continue doing the oxalic acid treatments for us while we're restricted in travel, and we're now confident that the numbers will stay low, but we still have to keep monitoring. This was the most diverse season we've had with Hive 5. Huge thanks go to team members Eleanor and Martin, who stepped up to assist with the hive and its varied treatment over the season. If anyone would like to join Hive 5 and assist with the oxalic acid treatments, please get in touch. And I can add to that, just email admin or email me, and I can help put you in contact with the Hive 5 team. Thank you.
Thanks, Karin. Myself, Steve here, and I'll report for Hive 6. Jit and Angela are out actually looking after their hives today, so they were unable to join the webinar to present for themselves, but I'll do on their behalf. So Hive 6 finished the honey season quite strongly, but then Varroa took hold. Baverol strips were put in by the club after the extraction day on 29th February, and sticky board mite counts to check on the effectiveness. Those sticky board were put in a month later, being the halfway point in the Baverol treatment period. First mite count was 275 mites over 7 days, an average of 40 a day. An immediate oxalic acid vaporization treatment was undertaken as a precautionary step, with further sticky board counts to check on the effectiveness of the strips. Further sticky boards still showed high mite count, so OA treatments were increased to twice weekly, with checking of mite drops at each treatment. After 8 OA treatments over a 5-week period, the last mite count on 3rd of May showed 51 mites over 3 days, or just under 20 mites per day. A reduction of close to 60% from the beginning. And after another OA treatment, hopefully the numbers will be low enough now for the bees to be able to cope with the remaining population over winter. Thanks from the team to Karin and myself for doing the OA treatments, mite counts, and keeping the team informed during that period. The plan going forward is to feed the honey stored in the frames back to the bees so they can take the honey down and store any excess in the brood box closer to the brood nest and their winter cluster. We expect this process of feeding the honey back will take another couple of weeks, after which time the empty honey supers will be removed for storage and the colony will overwinter with the top feeder left on for sugar syrup feeding when and as required. So they'll be doing an AFB check this weekend. Easier to do these checks when there are a few people around, as the bees have to be shaken off to do a good inspection of brood, and they'll take photographs of each frame and then inspect the photographs more closely at the afterwards. The idea then being that this enables them to do a check faster without running the same risk of robbing and having the hive open for longer than is absolutely necessary. And the photos can also be part of the club's AFB records. So that's a recording from Hive 6, which is the polystyrene hive. There, the old yellow hive. I'm afraid for the top bar hive, the report is not as happy and successful as all the other hives have been. We started off with a package of bees because, of course, we'd lost the hive last winter. So we started off with a package of bees purchased about October. And those were installed into the hive, took off, did great guns. Queen was laying well. And then about into December, we found that the queen was laying drones only. She was an artificially inseminated queen, and I suspect it was a poor mating on there. It wasn't a natural airborne mating. And I suspect she was poorly mated because she'd basically run out of sperm and she was purely laying drones. We got a replacement queen from the same source once we informed them. But I'm afraid that queen, after about 3 or 4 weeks, absconded. So late June, she took off, and we don't know the reason for that. We then obtained a replacement new mated queen from Lion Apiaries, Dallas, and put her into the hive, and initially started off well, and going through and into late February and into March. But then in early March, I'm afraid the hive again absconded and was then being robbed out. Due to the situation and the difficulty of either taking a split and putting it into a top bar or something like that, the difference in format of frames and this sort of thing, we decided to cut our losses at this stage. We closed the hive down, removed any remaining honey that was in there, and the hive is currently closed up for winter. So we're going to start with a fresh hive again in springtime. I'm looking to move the hive over to a new location. There's nothing scientific about this. This is just a gut feeling from myself that the hive is just sitting in the wrong place. It's potentially catching too much drift in from other hives or things like that. So I'm going to shift it over to the other side of the apiary and try a new orientation and different layout, and then a new queen in there or a new package of bees, and we'll see how we go in spring. But I'm afraid that in comparison with all the other hives and the success that we've had there, the top bar has been not a success this year. I think I'm going to fire myself as a hive leader. Either that or I'll just blame it on, on something else. But yeah, it has not been, unfortunately, as good as I would have liked there. One thing, though, which I am very pleased with from sort of the committee point of view, is that having lost 4 hives last winter, and I probably shouldn't speak too early, but I think we're in a much better position this year. The club took an active decision to manage our hives overall much more carefully and aggressively, if that's the right word, for Varroa going into winter, and also to reduce the number of hives and therefore the potential for drift and robbing and things like that. I think both these actions have had a positive result. And the different hive reports coming back, talking there about the drive to reduce the mite numbers, and this will continue going on to our next season, and hopefully we'll have a much better season this time. Righty-ho, so that's it for Hive 6 and the top bar hive. I'd like to now move on to the Q&A session. So we've done, for this Q&A, there were going to be 3 of us as your panel in here. That's Paul Walsh, Terry Ann Smith, who's our new treasurer, taking over from David Davies, and she is also onto the committee, and myself as the 3 panelists for Q&A session. So if I open up the questions which have been put in, Sue Fletcher saying that she'd like to see a North Shore club group and wondering what people feel. This picks up also on David Davies' comment earlier on about searching out people in your local area and getting a group together, a group that I'm in covering sort of Sandringham, Point Chev, Mount Albert group. I have found has been immensely valuable over the past few years. So I strongly support Sue and anybody else on the North Shore who's looking to get a team together over to there. And Mark Jenkins, similar idea, great idea to easily find other beekeepers in my area. As I say, if you want to go into the club area, or sorry, not signing into the club, but into the public area of the club, and then go into reporting the swarm and have a look down there, you'll see what we set up at the beginning of the season for those people who wanted to collect swarms. So it's a map with flags on it, and there are people who were reporting themselves happy and capable to pick up a swarm, and they could put notes in there about, you know, I've got a ladder so I can, you know, get higher up swarms and things like that. What David was referring to is the idea of basically setting up another layer of information on that map, which is about people who are prepared to assist either with an inquiry from the public perhaps, or inquiry from new beginner beekeepers in their area, and the ability to assist, answer questions and things like that. So that's an idea that the committee is looking to develop and give us some feedback on that one. And a question from Tim Wilcox. Consider changing the entrance of the top bar hive from a side to a side entrance from the end. And I must confess, my one at home is a side entrance and has gone successfully and managed itself year after year since I started it up, and very little intervention required from me there. So that's one way in which, and that the top bar there does have at least one side entrance into it. So that is something that we could have a look at as well. And that's a good suggestion there. I don't know, Paul, whether you're good on top bar hives and whether you want to, what would be your suggestion is in terms of a side versus an end entrance on a top bar hive?
I confess that top bar hives I've gone off. When I first started out, you know, like 20 years ago, I thought they were the greatest thing, you know, natural and all that sort of stuff. But I fairly quickly got away from that. I made a couple, and we made one for the club and things like that. Yeah, I just found that they tend to be swarmy, and yeah, the Varroa thing is a bit harder because they're longer, and it's much harder to keep an idea of your mite counts, and indeed doing your treatments. but there's different designs. But I have gone off them. And
Okay.
for the last 10 years or so, I've just had ordinary hives.
Righty-ho. What I'll do here is I'll get Dave Henricks to post up. We did some polls as the other talks were going on. So we're saying here, how long is a reasonable time to have your hives open in winter? Almost 2/3 of people saying 5 to 10 minutes. A third saying 10 to 15. And one or two people or a couple of people saying 15 or more. Terry, how would you, or Terry Ann, sorry, I must give you your proper name. How would you like to answer this one about opening up a hive at this time of year or into winter, and what would be a reasonable time to have it open for?
I think the general rule you're looking for here is to try and keep your bees warm. So if you've got your hives in a nice sunny spot and there's not a lot of wind and it's going to take you 10 to 15 minutes to do what needs to be done, go ahead. I wouldn't have a problem with that. But if it's raining, well, I was told, and I can see this be the absolute truth, if your bees get wet in the winter, they've got no way of warming up. So, just don't let them get wet. If it's cold or if it's windy, try and put it off. But if you absolutely have to go in, this is your only opportunity to go in to do something that needs to do, whether it's to put in a varroa treatment because you've done a count and you've pulled the board out and you just urgently need to get a varroa treatment in there. Just try and do it in less than 5 minutes if you can. But if it's going to take longer than that, if you've got 3 boxes to get off before you can get to your bees to put the treatment in, then you need to take that much longer. And never panic. Never ever panic when you're working your bees. This comes from a person who's had more stings this year than ever. But you make mistakes when you're panicking. So you're not going to, it's a case of more haste, less speed.
Yep.
So
yep. Good stuff on there. I think absolutely right about not going in when it's wet. Just don't even think about opening your hive. Be aware that if your temperatures, if it's a cool morning, that there's still probably quite a few bees over your brood and keeping it warm, and therefore your bee population, there's going to be more girls inside the hive than there would be on a warmer day once it's warmed up a little bit more. One thing about opening it up during winter I think is a good idea is keeping either a spare hive lid or a good towel, and one which has been soaked in water but then wrung out, and that can be good so that you can actually lift a box off, put it to one side, and then put a hive mat over the top of it. And that's a good way of keeping the smell in the hive, the girls from stopping and boiling up over the top of the hive and making it difficult to reassemble it afterwards, but also it keeps the smell in there and reduces robbing and things like that. So, yep, at this time of year, keep your inspections and your openings shorter rather than longer. Paul, anything you'd like to add on timings for this time of year, winter?
Quicker the better.
Quicker the better.
Issues are rain, but also wind. And the suggestion with the towel is actually, if you wet it and then dry it again, that actually makes it heavier so that it doesn't tend to blow around so much. But some people make up a cover, with a drawstring or just, even a bit of elastic to sort of hold on there, because your wind is a bit of an enemy, and wind, in fact, I'd say it's even worse than rain, because the wind it's really hard to stop, but the rain, I suppose you can put an umbrella on it,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's wet, wind, nasty. And in fact, some people will put a screen around it if they have to work it. There's gazebos and things like that, but most people wouldn't do that unless you're commercial and you've got the necessary to do it, and you've got a truck with the gear.
Yep. Okay, that's a good one. Thanks. There's a question come up here from Jorg saying, maybe a stupid question. I've done sugar shakes for Varroa chicks. He's using a closed bottom board. and he wants to put a sticky in there to check on the count. And how would you use a sticky board in conjunction with a closed bottom hive? Paul, you want to carry on with this one?
I've never tried it, but you would have to, when I do sugar shake counts with for Varroa, first of all, you got to have dry sugar and everything like this. But if you're going to, you'd have to basically collect it off the bottom, and then wash it with a wash bottle through a sieve to pick up your Varroa, rather than trying to count them, because you get the powder of you know, you basically your sugar powder hides any mites. But yeah, it's kind of like, you normally wouldn't do it, but you could. And certainly you wouldn't use a commercial sticky board because of the cost of it. But yeah, if you take your board out later and then you wash it down with a squeeze bottle through a sieve that's the right size, it's, your sugar dissolves, and you're left with the mites.
Okay. I'd have two aspects to this one, I think, from my perspective. One is that, of course, if you're looking to basically have the sticky between your frames and your solid base, then getting it in there is going to be a slight issue, because you've basically got to lift that your boxes up to get it in. So that's one area that I'd be a bit concerned about there, is opening your hive up simply to put a sticky board in.
Well, people do that, but it's got to be smaller. You've got to have a full width entrance. Yep. Or take it out somehow or other, and it's not going to get anything towards the edges. Plus, when you're moving it, you're quite likely to lose half of your sugar and your mites and things like that.
The other aspect that it comes,
better than not having any count at all.
Sure. The other one that would concern me is I would not use a commercial sticky board inside the hive, because you're just going to end up with too many girls stuck to it. And I have seen with using the cooking oil on the boards, which is what we're just using for the mite drops, that there's quite often one or two bees which have got onto it, unfortunately, on their back. Their wings stick to the oil, and then they can't get off, and they end up dying, basically stuck to the board by their wings. And that's with it underneath a screen bottom to a hive. So you obviously have much, much fewer bees there. I would have concerns about putting a sticky board of any shape into the inside of the hive, between the bottom of your brood area and your the solid base of the hive, and that would probably not be a recommended for me. I would go back and do another sugar shake after you've done your treatment to see what the results would be out of that.
If you just, it depends on if you're trying to use a sugar shake as a mite treatment as well.
No, this I think was for a count.
Yeah, well, you could put a tray on the bottom, like a tray with a little rim on it, like it's only 5 mils thick or something, that you can fit inside the hive. That way you'll collect all your sugar and any mites and any bits and pieces of bees, and you can take it out of the hive, let the bees fly off, and wash out.
You can do a count out after that. Yep.
Yeah, but it's the normal way to make a sugar shake is to catch the bees and put them in in a jar and shake them and all that sort of stuff. The thing about any sugar shake is you've got to be consistent as to what you're doing. If you're committing yourself to using a board down the bottom and collecting them, it's a bigger proposition than sampling, but your sampling is better, if you see what I mean, because you're not just picking any old 250 bees or whatever.
Yep.
Does that make sense? You're doing a whole hive test rather than just a sugar test in a jar. but you're going to use a lot more sugar.
Okay, yep, understood. Thanks for that. There's one question in here about, oh, it looks as though somebody's already answered that on wintering down the Hive 5, which is the bench hive. And I suspect one of the other panelists has probably grabbed that. Oh no, there we are, Martin Spinks. How are you planning to winter down Hive 5, the bench hive, bearing in mind the honey is stored across most of the frames? What we're doing is we'll put the separator in, so we'll basically take the better frames, shift those left and closer to the brood, and the part-filled frames shift off to the right, and then as we get in closer we'll actually shift the separator, which is the solid separator, and we'll shift that up closer so that that keeps more warmth in on that left hand side there, although honey itself is fairly good thermally in terms of protection in there, so I don't think we're going to get much in the way of loss off to the right hand side of the bench hive. So it's really just a case of thinking horizontally rather than vertically. You're taking similar actions on the bench hive that you would in an ordinary Langstroth, but you're just laying them out horizontally rather than vertically. So just reducing those frames down, and we can have a look potentially, because I was in there the other day and saw a couple of the there's some quite old brood frames in there, so I think we'll cycle some of those brood frames out as well. And it would probably better for another poll that we want to go through. Dave, do you want to throw up another poll answer into there? How many mites do you think is acceptable on your drop board after 24 hours? And we've got a good mix here of, I'm surprised that somebody has had 20 plus. If I was looking at 20 plus mites on a drop board after 24 hours, I would be seriously concerned, particularly at this time of year as we come in close to winter. None, 1 to 10, 10 to 20. Terry Ann, why don't you dive into this one? Mites on a drop over 24 hours.
Well, I've very rarely seen more than 20. But I have, and when I did, I got straight in and treated. Yeah, obviously it'd be very difficult for the bees to live with that rate of mites in their hive, I think. 10 to 20, I'd be getting in and treating pretty quickly too. 1 to 10 is fairly normal. At the higher level of that range, you know, say 8, 9, 10, I'd be looking at what treatment I'd had on. I'd be looking at why it hasn't worked yet, or maybe it has worked. You know, if I'd had 20 at the beginning of the treatment period, it was down to 10, I might say, well, it's obviously working. I'll just leave the same strips in for a couple of weeks. If they'd only been in for 6 weeks, say, when I tested it. None's obviously ideal. None's ideal. The 21% of you are out there expecting none, great. Yep. That's the perfect result.
My
not
thoughts.
Often seen it.
Yeah, indeed. And don't be tempted just because you've got none to think that there are no mites in your hive. They will still be there. They're always there. The level that we've been working to when we've been doing oxalic acid vaporization across the hives has been looking at less than 5 per day, and around 3 as being reasonably ideal, and so forth. So sort of 2 to 3 mites a day would be a drop that I'd be reasonably comfortable with. Paul, any thoughts on that one?
If you're not doing treatments, if you say treated in, you know, you're doing a strip treatment, say, you know, March and September sort of deal, then you can expect to find, you know, a few more mites, if you like, than you do a few less mites. You hope you're going to get less mites per week, if you like, or per 24 hours, than if you're doing a treatment. If you're doing a treatment, you're actively killing them. And so, you know, if you like, a treating mite count is going to be higher than an untreated mite count, if you see what I mean.
Yep, good point.
One's looking at the overall population and one's looking at the susceptible mites on that day. But you're only getting that day, You see what I mean? You're not
Yeah.
getting overall.
And this was something that came out in Lisa's Hive report on Hive 3 when she talked about, although that they had been doing treatments, they missed some of them, and that over maybe that 2-week period, the mite count went right up to about 170 or so. And as you say, once they'd done an oxalic acid vaporization. So your initial count, what you're looking to do is have stability at a low number. So, you know, a number of different 24-hour counts over a period of time, and a consistently low number of, say, 2 to 3 per day. That's the sort of thing where you're looking to get to, would be my recommendation for looking at it. Yeah, don't ever take just one by themselves. Look at it over a number of days, do a number of counts and see whether you've got consistency in there, and looking for a consistency of about 1 or 2.
Yeah, because they're fundamentally, the two processes are different. If you're doing, you know, you're not going to kill all the mites with like an oxalic acid treatment. You're only going to get a certain percentages of the mites. So your level of your mites in your hive is going to be higher on average. Now, if you manage to get your mites down with some treatment that kills supposedly, you know, 99.9% of them or whatever, then it's going to be low initially, and it's going to take a long time to build up. But if you're doing, you know, the sort of organic, well, not organic's not quite the right word, but if you're using the sort of oxalic acid type of treatment, then you're going to have a higher level of mites on average all the time. Does that sort of make sense?
Okay, one point that Walter raised as well is a good one about over-reliance potentially, or be aware of some of the things which can occur around drop boards for mite counts.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that ants will remove mites which have dropped through and onto the board. So that can influence, and this is one of the reasons why I'm saying 2 to 3, and if it's above 5, I'm looking to do more treatments and increase the treatment and so forth into the hive, because even with 2 to 3, I'm assuming that some mites have maybe you know, been carried off or something like that, that the actual count is going to be a little bit higher. So if I did say a sugar shake or an alcohol wash, and this is one of the things, is that saying, you know, for a sugar shake, you're looking at maybe a maximum of 5 mites per 100 bees, because some of them will get missed by a sugar shake, and that the most accurate is an alcohol wash. So just bear in mind that if you're looking to do mite counts based on a drop board at the bottom, that allow a little bit of an increase on that, because some of the mites will have been potentially carried away and so forth there.
You're also looking at
yep.
the mites that aren't in the brood. And
yes.
that's always the big question is, how much brood have you got, and you know, and how many bees are emerging, you know?
Okay. Why don't we dive into the third of the polls here, Dave, if you want to bring that up, because we're coming up to 12:30, so I'm just mindful. How many hives do you have on a suburban section? And what's a maximum number? So we've got just about an equal split between 1 to 2 and 3 to 5, and other people, yeah, a couple of people saying 5 to 10. Terry Ann, why don't you dive in on this one?
I can do that again.
Yep.
Well, out of my backyard at the moment, we have 4 wintered down full depth boxes, hive colonies, and 5 nukes. Now the 5 nukes were not meant to be there. They were queens. I requeened last autumn, and so I put the queens aside. You know, don't kill the queen until you're sure the new one's working. Put my queens aside and would have sold them by now or whatever, but for the lockdown. So we currently have 9, but that's absolutely unacceptable on a suburban section. I ply my neighbours with honey so we don't get complaints.
Perfect. Thanks for that. When you started saying that you had 4 hives and 5 nukes, I thought, oh my God, I've asked the wrong person the wrong question on this, because of course it is. But you've ended up exactly as I would have wished. And yeah.
Yeah. So we do have plans to reduce that to our usual 3.
Yep.
That is the number we try to maintain here. The council likes you to keep 2, but we figure our section's twice the size of most suburban sections. And we're quite happy to keep 3, 1 at the front, 2 out the back and 1 out the front.
Okay. Yep. And I also have 3 at home as well, which I think is absolutely fine for me and good for a suburban section.
Yeah, but if you're on a smaller section, and again, you might want to think whether any of your close neighbours have got hives. If you're on a modern 200 square metre section, and 3 of your immediate neighbours also have bees, you might want to pester them for honey rather than keep your own, or find somebody who lives not too far away with a bigger space. But the council doesn't like you to have more than 2, or if they get complaints. The rules are that you're allowed to keep animals until the neighbours complain. Yeah.
And I have dealt with one, and it just so that other people are aware, I had the council approach me recently, a beekeeper in St Heliers, who I think had something like 35 hives on his section. He had been kind to another beekeeper who'd given up and taken his hives over, and so forth, and complaints from a number of neighbours around, difficulty of looking after, I think difficulty to manage that many, your Varroa counts, all your problems magnify. So yeah, 2, something like that for the council, 2 to 3, I think is a good number of hives for a suburban section, unless, as you say, you've got a very small section, or you can do what one of our club members has done and put her hives up on the veranda on the first floor, so they get a head start when they're flying. They don't need to fly up and quite as far to get over the fence and things like that. But they're right outside allowance, so yep, that's something that you can do there as well.
Yeah. And also, I'd like to add to that: keep your neighbours informed. We had to burn a hive in our first or second year before I was actually doing any of the beekeeping. We had to burn one. And we dug a hole in our backyard and had a lovely bonfire, and we had the neighbour looking over the fence to make sure that our house wasn't on fire.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's a couple of areas there we probably had our fire somewhat too big, and next time I won't. Next time I'll go to those people who are advertised in the Bee Journal. I say next time because it's happened more than once to us. We'll go to those people who advertise in the Bee Journal that they will burn your AFB hive for you.
Yep. And particularly if you have plastic frames, don't think about sort of trying to do it at home. I think they're incredibly pores of black smoke and smelly and yucky and everything else like that. So yeah, if there is a requirement to burn a hive, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's a good one. Another question there. How often to check a hive over winter? Mr. Walsh, do you want to dive onto that?
Yeah, I have a problem in that I should check more, but I'm too lazy.
Join the club.
Over winter, I'd say, like between now and July, you'd only need to do a couple of looks, if you like, rather than inspections. If you're happy with the hive when you'd wintered down, you can avoid, opening the hives and that. You go along there, and if you were happy when you let it there and you're looking, there's the same sort of bees coming and going and what have you, I'd try to leave it until you get into beginning of August or into July. Because if there's no bees coming and going, well, there's probably nothing you can do about it anyway. The only issues are things like AFB checks and that, where you've got to do it. But with inspections, you can just hopefully lift the top off and see if they've eaten all that honey in the top box. And if they have, then you either replace it with a feeder or do something like that.
Yep, I think that's a very valid point.
You want to stay away from opening them up if you can.
Yeah.
But in summer, once you start getting into July, August, then you're going to have to start ramping up your number of inspections,
yep.
both from the AFB side of it, from the starvation side of it, and the fact that your bees will start to build up and through into September.
Yep.
Towards September. It's kind of like you look at the hive as you go to the apiary and you decide what you're going to do, rather than say, I'm going to go there and I'm going to inspect everything. It's kind of like unnecessary, but that's kind of like a judgment thing. I mean, the first year you might want to do inspections and that's okay, but unless
yep.
you need to, don't.
Okay, I think an important thing there is to, as soon as you can, if it's your first year or after, build up an awareness of what sort of food supplies there are over winter. So how much competition is there for food in your local area, or do you have lots of keen gardeners nearby and not much competition? Because that's one of the things is obviously it's checking to make sure that they've got enough food and stuff like that. So that will determine to a certain extent your frequency of inspections. I'm lucky. I have food coming in over winter and they fill up frames and cap them even through the middle of winter. So I can go away on holiday for 5 or 6 weeks and just leave the hive alone. And I know that it's pretty good once I've settled it down for winter. So it can vary to a certain extent, but stay out of your hive as much as you can.
Having said that, it can be quite deceptive. I mean, you can open the top of the hive and you see there's plenty of honey there, but actually the bees aren't getting it. You know, their brood, they're miles. The honey's you've got is miles away from the brood, so you just want to be careful.
Make sure they've got some close enough to the brood that they can get it without. Good point. Carol, do you still want to answer that question on end versus side entrances to the top bar hive?
Yes, I can do that. Basically, I've just pulled out 2 books from my my library. Philip Chandler, he has his hives, he beekeeps in the UK, and all his top bar hives have got side entrances. And Wyatt Magnum, he's from
USA, yep.
He's from the States. He has all his from the front, so I really don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think the whole secret of actually keeping top bar hives doing well over winter is basically making sure that your runner boards keep the bees warm, and that you've got ways of blocking entrances and opening them up again, basically.
Okay, thanks for that.
Okay.
That's good. We've got no open questions left in there, and it's 12:30, a lovely day, and maybe we want to go out and into our own hives and so forth. Is there anything from the panelists that they particularly want to mention or that we haven't covered off? Otherwise, I'll thank everybody for dialing in and participation and so forth, and we'll call this a meeting.
Yeah, there's one thing I would like to say is that when we're talking about mite drops, I think it's quite important to know the difference between a natural mite fall and a mite count that you would get by, say, doing an ether roll or something like that. When we do a natural mite count, there's a table that you look at that actually gives you the actual number of mites, because a natural mite count only counts the mites that actually come down through that board. So there is a table that you can get hold of, and it's actually in the next journal that's coming out that tells you how to look at the actual mites. So when you're looking up information about mite counts, I think it's quite important to look at the difference between a natural mite count and a mite count that's done by sampling bees in the hive. They are totally different things.
Yeah. Yep. Good point. Absolutely right. Yep. We've got a late question in there about talking about oxalic strips. Do we want to cover that in this?
I think somebody's already answered that question and said to have a look on the New Zealand website and have a look at Randy Oliver's work.
Okay, yep.
And I think that as we're not sort of on the super registered side, that we probably, that's the best way to get that kind of information.
Yep, yep, indeed. Okie dokie. Thanks very much indeed to everybody who dialed in, participated, or on the panel for both joining in and for assisting with today's webinar, and also for the preparation for it. We will send out a link, because we've recorded this, of course, so we will send out a link to members so that you can have a look at it later on if you didn't manage to catch it or came in part way or something like that. We will also send out, I think, the notes from the slides that Kim wasn't able to get into her talk. So we'll do that. A big thank you also from for the university. They have provided this webinar capability for us, and we're immensely grateful because it's allowed us to continue on, offer a new way of reaching out to our members, getting information and so forth across there. So yeah, a big ups and a big thanks and a hand to the Auckland Uni for that one. We are very grateful to them for that. So if that's a lot, I'll say thanks very much indeed for everybody who's participated, contributed, dialed in, or whatever. We'll get the links out to you. We'll get the slides and so forth. We might do the Q&A and so forth afterwards as well. That you've asked and that various panelists have been answering while this conversation's been going on. And Dave Hendricks, unless there's anything else, I think we'll call that an end of a meeting.
Thank you very much. I'll kill it off now.
Right, Hill. Cheers.
All right.